Anya's arrival. The stagecoach lurched to a halt, its springs groaning under the sudden lack of momentum. Dust billowed, coating Anya's already travel-worn face. She blinked, pushing a stray strand of dark hair behind her ear as she peered out the window. Redemption. It looked less like salvation and more like a forgotten corner of the world. Buildings huddled together, bleached pale by the relentless sun. A few men lounged on the boardwalk, their faces shadowed by wide-brimmed hats. It was nothing like the rolling green hills of her homeland, nothing like the birch forests she'd known. Taking a deep breath, Anya adjusted the worn carpet bag at her feet and stepped down. The heat hit her like a wall, thick and heavy. The air smelled of dry earth and something else, something wild and unfamiliar. Horses. A man detached himself from the group on the boardwalk and walked towards her. He was tall, even taller than she had imagined from the photograph, with a lean, weathered face and eyes that seemed to hold both the vastness of the sky and the secrets of the earth. Rance Callahan. Miss Petrova? His voice was a low rumble, the kind that resonated deep in her chest. Duh. I am Anya Petrova. She tried to keep her voice steady, but a tremor betrayed her nervousness. His gaze was assessing, taking in her simple cotton dress, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she clutched her bag. It wasn't unkind, but it was thorough. Welcome to Redemption, he said, offering a hand. I'm Rance Callahan. Anya hesitated for a moment before placing her hand in his. His grip was firm, calloused, sending a jolt of unexpected warmth through her. She quickly withdrew her hand, suddenly self-conscious. Let's get your trunk, he said, turning to the driver who was already unloading luggage from the roof of the stagecoach. He directed the man to load it onto a waiting buckboard, his movements economical and efficient. He then gestured for Anya to climb aboard. The ride to Redemption Ranch was mostly silent. Anya watched the landscape unfold, a panorama of scrub brush, rocky hills, and distant mountains shimmering in the heat. It was beautiful in its own stark way, but it didn't feel like home. The ranch house was a sprawling, single-story structure made of rough-hewn logs. It looked solid and sturdy, a testament to the resilience of the people who had built it. A few men were working in the corral, their voices carrying on the still air. As they approached, a dog, a scruffy mutt with one floppy ear, trotted out to greet them, barking a cheerful welcome. Rance helped Anya down from the buckboard. This is it, he said, his gaze sweeping across the ranch. Redemption Ranch. Anya forced a smile. It is big. He chuckled, a brief, almost hesitant sound. It is. Come on, I'll show you to your room. The room was small, tucked away at the back of the house. It contained a narrow bed, a small wooden table, and a wash basin. A single window looked out over the dusty yard. It was sparsely furnished, but clean. It's not much, Rance said, his voice apologetic. But it's yours. It is fine, Anya replied, trying to sound convincing. She placed her carpet bag on the bed. Supper's at 6, he said, turning to leave. If you need anything. He paused, his hand on the doorframe. Just ask. And then he was gone, leaving Anya alone in the small, unfamiliar room. She sank onto the edge of the bed, the springs groaning beneath her weight. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, framed photograph of her family. Her mother, her father, her younger brother, all smiling. A wave of homesickness washed over her, so intense it brought tears to her eyes. She missed the familiar smells of her mother's kitchen, the sound of her brother's laughter, the comforting weight of her father's hand on her shoulder. Here, there was only dust and silence and the vast, unforgiving landscape. Anya opened her trunk and began to unpack. A few simple dresses, a woolen shawl, a small icon of the Virgin Mary. Each item was a reminder of the life she had left behind. She carefully placed the icon on the table, a small beacon of faith in this strange new world. As she hung up her dresses, she noticed a small, hand-stitched sampler tucked away in the corner of her trunk. It was a gift from her grandmother, embroidered with a simple phrase, "Home is where the heart is." Anya traced the faded stitches with her finger. Maybe, just maybe, she could make a home here. But first, she had to find her heart. She glanced out the window, her gaze drawn to the distant mountains. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. It was a breathtaking sight, a stark contrast to the dull browns and grays of the ranch. Anya took a deep breath, a new resolve hardening her gaze. She was Anya Petrova, and she was not easily broken. She had come to Redemption Ranch to build a new life, and she would not fail. She would learn to love this land, to find beauty in its harshness, to make a home for herself, even if it meant starting from nothing. And maybe, just maybe, she would find love too. Dust and dreams. A puff of grit rose with each awkward shuffle as Anya grappled with the chicken coop's obstinate latch. The sun, a brazen eye in the sky, scorched the back of her neck, gluing the borrowed dress to her skin. A flurry of panicked squawks erupted as the hens, sensing her unfamiliarity, scattered in a flurry of feathers. Back in Russia, her hands, nimble and sure, had coaxed life into lace and breathed vibrant hues into embroidered linens. Now they felt ham-fisted, strangers to the rough-hewn wood and unyielding metal. Rance's instructions had been curt, his demonstration swift. He'd left her to sink or swim. The ranch hands, hardened by sun and wind, cast speculative glances but maintained a respectful distance. She was an enigma, a delicate teacup amidst ironstone. Later, she tackled milking a cow. The wet hiss of milk hitting the pail and the warm spray against her cheek offered a strange comfort, though her muscles protested with dull aches. The cow, a gentle giant with melancholy eyes, endured her ineptitude with stoic grace. "Probably thinks I'm hopeless," Anya mused. As evening descended, a deep unease settled upon her. The boundless sky, a stark contrast to the intimate embrace of birch forests and verdant hills, felt oppressive in its vastness. She yearned for the liquid murmurs of the Volga, the resinous tang of pine after rain, the familiar cadences of her village voices. Here, the quiet was a heavy blanket, torn only by the lonely lament of distant coyotes. Longing thrummed beneath her ribs, a constant echo of everything abandoned. Yet, even within the sorrow, a spark refused to be extinguished. She had journeyed too far, risked too much, to surrender to despair. The following dawn, Rance discovered her tending a calf, its small body racked with chills. The men had written it off, another casualty of the harsh land, but Anya refused to concede defeat. She spoon-fed it a blend of milk and honey, her voice a soothing balm as she stroked its shivering flank. Rance leaned against the barn's entrance, his expression an inscrutable mask. He'd witnessed her stumbles, the initial fumbling and frustration. He'd anticipated a quick surrender, a retreat from the unforgiving realities of ranch life. But seeing the tenderness in her touch, the unwavering focus in her gaze as she nursed the sick animal, he recognized something unexpected. A quiet fortitude, a strength that belied her fragile appearance. A glimmer of, what? Empathy? Unwavering care? He couldn't quite decipher it. He only knew it defied his expectations. Anya glanced up, her eyes locking with his. There was no fear, only a steadfast purpose. A shy smile touched her lips. "He is weak," she breathed, her voice barely audible. "But he will recover." Rance nodded, his gaze lingering on her face. The dust clinging to her hair and dress seemed to soften her features, revealing a subtle grace he hadn't perceived before. He turned and retreated. The image of her kneeling beside the calf burned into his memory. The calf, he realized, mirrored her own situation. Small, displaced, and vulnerable in an unforgiving environment. He hoped she, too, would find the tenacity to endure, perhaps even flourish. Whispers of winter. The wind veered, its icy fingers probing for weakness, chilling marrow to the quick. The air, so recently mild, now carried the metallic premonition of snow. Redemption girded itself for a siege. Anya, perched on the bunkhouse porch, observed the flurry of activity as ranch hands bustled to prepare. Jedediah, a lean figure etched with the grime of tobacco, oversaw the wood detail, his gruff commands timed to the blunt percussion of axes biting into timber beyond the barn. Others reinforced the stables, sealing gaps in the time-worn planks. The fragrant resin of pine mingled with the dank scent of upturned earth, a potent, earthy perfume. She drew her shawl tighter, a flimsy defense against the deepening cold. This was unlike the arid bite of the steppes, a humid cold that promised to permeate everything, settling in for a long occupation. Inside, Mrs. Henderson, the ranch cook, hummed a wordless tune as she tended a cauldron of simmering stew. The kitchen, typically a vibrant hub of warmth, felt hushed, even the hearth fire seemed to hold its breath. "Mrs. Henderson," Anya began, her voice tentative. "Back home, in Russia, the winters can stretch for half a year. Snow that buries houses to their eaves." Mrs. Henderson paused, concern creasing her brow. "Good heavens, half a year? This ain't Russia, mind you, but our winters can be mean. Blizzards that'll white out the world, temperatures that'll freeze the spit in your mouth midair." She scooped a generous portion of stew into a bowl and extended it to Anya. "Eat up, child. You need to keep your strength about you." Anya accepted the offering with gratitude, the rich, savory scent filling her senses. She described troika rides through forests draped in snow, the crystalline artistry of ice sculptures that graced the frozen Neva during winter festivals, the comforting embrace of the samovar, and the endless flow of tea shared amidst loved ones. Mrs. Henderson listened, mesmerized, her usual exuberance replaced by quiet fascination. "Sounds like a fairy tale," she breathed, thoughtfully stirring the stew. Later, as twilight painted the valley in deepening hues, Anya drifted back to the porch. The wind quickened, whipping fallen leaves into fleeting dervishes. Rance was approaching from the stables, his form a dark outline against the fading light. He halted upon seeing her, his expression a closed book. "Getting nippy out here," he observed, his voice a low rumble. He snugged his coat closer. Anya nodded, avoiding his gaze. "It reminds me of home," she murmured. "Before everything changed." He remained silent, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Winter's coming on fast this year. Feels like it's gonna be a bruiser." He paused, then glanced at her. "You'll be okay, Anya. We'll look out for you." The words, plain and unadorned, carried an unexpected warmth. It wasn't affection offered, but a shield extended, an acknowledgement of belonging. A nascent spark of hope flickered within her, a fragile flame against the gathering dusk. The wind keened, rattling the window panes. A lone snowflake, plump and solitary, descended, landing on her outstretched palm. It vanished in a fleeting moment, leaving only a damp trace. She met Rance's gaze in the twilight. For an instant, she glimpsed something in his eyes, a well of understanding, a shadow of vulnerability. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his customary reserve. He gave a short nod and started toward the entrance. At the threshold, he hesitated, glancing back at her. "Better get inside, Anya. It's shaping up to be a long one." The blizzard's fury. The wind howled a banshee's lament, clawing at the window panes of the main house. What began as a gentle snowfall had transformed into a furious, blinding assault. Anya watched, mesmerized and terrified, as the world outside dissolved into a swirling white chaos. Redemption Ranch had vanished. "This is a bad one," Rance said, his voice low, almost a rumble. He stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the raging storm. He'd seen blizzards before, countless ones in his life, but this felt different, more malevolent. "Bad how?" Anya asked, her voice barely a whisper above the wind's roar. "Trapped in the house for days bad. Livestock freezing if we don't get to them bad." He turned from the window, his jaw tight. "I need to get to the south pasture. See if the fences are holding." Anya's eyes widened. "In this? No time to waste." He grabbed his thickest coat and a battered Stetson from a peg by the door. He moved with a determined stride toward the entryway. "Wait," Anya called out. "I want to help." Rance paused, skepticism etched on his face. "You've never seen a blizzard like this, Anya. It's not a walk in the park." "I may not be a ranch hand," she retorted, "but I'm not afraid of a little snow. Besides, two are better than one, aren't they?" He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. "All right, but stay close. And do exactly as I say." Bundled in every layer she could find, Anya followed Rance out into the storm. The wind hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and stinging her cheeks. Snow swirled around them, reducing visibility to mere feet. She could barely make out Rance's silhouette ahead of her. The barn loomed ahead, a dark shape swallowed by the whiteout. The lowing of cattle, usually a comforting sound, was now tinged with panic. Inside, the ranch hands were working frantically, heaping hay into the mangers and checking the animals for signs of distress. The air hung thick with the smell of manure and damp fur. Rance barked orders, his voice strained but firm. Anya, despite her inexperience, did her best to help, shoveling snow away from the barn doors and carrying buckets of water to the thirsty animals. The cold seeped into her bones, her fingers and toes numbed despite her gloves and boots. Hours blurred into a relentless cycle of shoveling, feeding, and checking. The blizzard showed no signs of relenting. The wind continued to shriek, and the snow fell thicker than ever. Finally, Rance called a halt. "We need to get back to the house," he said, his face grim. "Before it gets any worse." The trek back was even more perilous than before. The wind howled with renewed ferocity, and the snow had piled up, making it difficult to see the path. Anya stumbled frequently, her legs burning with exhaustion. Rance kept a firm grip on her arm, guiding her through the blinding storm. Back inside the main house, they stripped off their soaked outer layers and huddled by the fireplace, the only source of warmth. The fire crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The wind continued its assault, rattling the windows and shaking the very foundations of the house. Anya stared into the flames, her mind numb with exhaustion and fear. "Will it ever stop?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Rance sat beside her, his face etched with concern. He didn't answer for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the fire. "It always does," he said finally, his voice low. "Eventually." But Anya couldn't shake the feeling that this storm was different, that it was testing them, pushing them to their limits. And she wondered if they would be strong enough to withstand its fury. She was afraid. Not just for herself, but for the animals, for Rance, for the new life she was trying to build in this harsh, unforgiving land. She looked at Rance, really looked at him. His face, usually so stoic and reserved, was drawn with worry. He wasn't just a cattle baron, a ranch owner. He was responsible for all of this, for the lives of the animals, the livelihoods of his workers. And now that responsibility weighed heavily on his shoulders. Anya reached out and took his hand, her fingers cold against his calloused skin. He looked at her, surprised, his eyes searching her face. "We'll get through this," she said, her voice stronger now, fueled by a newfound determination. Together. He squeezed her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. For the first time since arriving at Redemption Ranch, Anya felt a glimmer of hope amidst the storm's relentless fury. Anya's trial. The first contraction tore through Anya, a jagged tear in the fabric of her being. She cried out, gripping the table's edge like a lifeline. Outside, the gale shrieked, a tormented spirit clawing at the cabin's flimsy walls. Rain hammered the glass, obscuring the twilight. "Rance?" she choked, fear a constricting band around her throat. He was there instantly, his usual stoicism shattered by alarm. "Anya? What is it?" "The baby?" she gasped as another wave crashed over her. "It's coming now." Color drained from Rance's face. He'd anticipated this day, of course, but the immediacy struck him like a physical blow, as potent as the tempest outdoors. A chilling sense of inadequacy washed over him. "But it's early by weeks." Anya's fingers tightened around his. "Babies heed their own time, Rance, not ours." He willed himself to breathe, grasping for the threads of Mrs. Henderson's instructions. He'd listened, agreed, jotted notes, but now his memory felt like a jumbled mess. "Right," he managed, his voice betraying a tremor. "Right, we can do this." He released her and stumbled toward the cupboard, desperation fueling his movements, where he'd secreted the birthing supplies, clean cloths, a kettle, a honed blade. He pawed through the items, his hands clumsy with panic. Where was the blasted knife? Anya's moan, sharp and piercing, sliced through his terror. He located the knife, swathed in linen, and hurried back. "I need boiling water," he stammered, his voice tight. "And more blankets." He began feeding the stove, his movements erratic. The kindling caught, painting dancing shadows across Anya's face. The wind buffeted the cabin, threatening to rip it from its foundations. He shot a glance at Anya, her features twisted in agony. "I'll go fetch Mrs. Henderson," he blurted, knowing even as he spoke it was futile. The creek would be a violent surge, impassable in this maelstrom. He saw the grim truth dawn in her eyes. "We're alone," she breathed, a thread of despair woven into her voice. Rance sank to his knees beside her, reclaiming her hand. "We're not alone," he insisted, injecting resolve into his tone. "I'm here. And Mrs. Henderson, she prepared me. We'll manage." He squeezed her hand, then rose. "Water first. And clean the rags." He moved with a frantic energy, driven by terror and a newfound grit. He filled the kettle, setting it on the hot surface, then delved into Anya's trunk, unearthing soft, time-worn linens which he tore into strips. Anya's labor intensified. Her cries escalated, punctuated by the resounding booms that echoed in the air. Rance felt a wave of paralyzing helplessness. He was lost, adrift. Then Mrs. Henderson's calm words resonated in his mind. "Steady yourself, Rance. Patience. And heed the woman." He knelt again, wiping her face with a cool cloth. "Guide me," he pleaded, his voice a soothing balm. "Tell me how to help." Her eyes fluttered open, focusing on his. "Help me breathe," she rasped. "Like the wind, in and out." He mirrored her, inhaling deeply, exhaling slowly, trying to match her rhythm. Gradually her breathing evened. The harshness remained on her face, but the stark panic seemed to ebb. The kettle shrieked, its whistle a piercing counterpoint to the storm's fury. Rance recoiled, seizing it with a thick cloth. He poured the steaming water into a basin, soaking the linen strips. He bathed Anya's face, her neck, gently massaging her shoulders. He wasn't sure if it was making a difference, but he had to act. He had to be her strength. Hours dissolved into an endless cycle of pain and exertion. The elements raged outside, an echo of the turmoil within their wooden sanctuary. Exhaustion gnawed at Rance, his muscles screaming, his mind reeling. Yet, he remained at Anya's side, murmuring encouragement, dabbing her brow, pouring every ounce of himself into easing her suffering. Then, at long last, a new sound shattered the air, a fragile, desperate wail. A daughter's cry. The shriek tore through the ranch house, a raw, animal sound that momentarily drowned out the wind's howl. Anya strained against the worn linen, her face slick with sweat, the firelight painting her skin in harsh relief. Rance, kneeling beside the bed, gripped her hand, his knuckles white. He muttered reassurances in a voice he barely recognized as his own. "Almost there, Anya. Almost there." But his words felt hollow, swallowed by the storm raging outside, mirrored by the tempest brewing within the small room. The air was thick with the scent of blood and fear, acrid and metallic. He wiped Anya's brow with a damp cloth, his hand shaking. He delivered calves, pulled horses from mud pits, but this was different. This was life, raw and untamed, fighting its way into the world. Another scream ripped through the air, followed by a guttural moan that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. Mrs. Olson, her face etched with worry, efficiently directed the proceedings, barking orders at Rance to fetch more water, more towels. He moved like a man in a dream, his movements clumsy and uncoordinated. He felt utterly useless. Then, a new sound. A thin, reedy cry, weak but undeniably there. It pierced the storm's fury, a fragile declaration of life against the odds. Anya collapsed back against the pillows, her breathing ragged, her eyes closed. Mrs. Olson, her face softening for a moment, expertly cleaned the baby, then wrapped her in a soft blanket. "It's a girl, Anya," she announced, her voice gruff but laced with something akin to tenderness. "A fine, healthy girl." Anya's eyes fluttered open, a weak smile gracing her lips. "My daughter," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Mrs. Olson placed the baby in Anya's arms. Rance watched, transfixed, as Anya gazed down at the tiny bundle, her face radiating a love so profound it took his breath away. He felt an unfamiliar ache in his chest, a longing he couldn't name. "Can I?" he began, his voice cracking. Anya nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "She's yours, Rance." He carefully took the baby into his arms, cradling her close. She was so small, so delicate. Her tiny face was scrunched up, her eyes squeezed shut. He felt an overwhelming surge of protectiveness, a fierce determination to keep her safe from the world's harsh realities. He stroked her cheek with a calloused finger, marveling at the softness of her skin. He was unprepared for the flood of emotion that washed over him, a tidal wave of love and gratitude. He had never felt anything like it. He looked at Anya, her face pale but radiant. He saw strength, resilience, and a love that transcended the storm and the harsh landscape they called home. He knew in that moment that his life had irrevocably changed. The cries of the infant echoed through the house, drawing the ranch hands from their duties. They gathered outside the door, their faces grim, their bodies tense from fighting the storm. When Mrs. Olson appeared, her face a rare smile, and announced the arrival of a baby girl, a collective sigh of relief swept through the group. A cheer went up, a ragged but heartfelt sound that momentarily drowned out the wind's howl. Bottles of whiskey were produced, toasts were made, and for a brief, fleeting moment, the storm seemed to recede, its fury tempered by the warmth of shared joy. Even the gruffest of the ranch hands cracked a smile, their faces softened by the promise of new life. Inside, Rance Callahan knelt by the fire, holding his daughter, his heart full. The snow outside continued to fall, but inside the ranch house, a new dawn had broken. Rance's choice. The wind's howl was a relentless torment, a grating edge of sound that resonated within the very foundations of the barn. Anya pressed closer to the hay, cradling the infant securely. Down below, Rance toiled with feverish intensity, reinforcing the barn door, adding yet another timber against the gale's assault. Every blast seemed intent on dismantling their sanctuary. Then the unthinkable happened. A sickening crack, like the splintering of a giant bone, reverberated through the tempest. The barn's north wall caved inward. Cattle, seized by panic, bellowed in terror, their cries consumed by the storm's ravenous appetite. The door shattered, its hinges surrendering to the force, and a swirling vortex of white spilled into the barn. Rance cursed, a harsh, guttural sound swallowed whole by the blizzard's fury. He wrestled his way through the terrified herd, pushing them away from Anya's makeshift refuge. The air plummeted, laced with the bite of stinging snow. He hauled himself into the loft, his expression a rigid mask. "We have to get out," he roared over the din, "this whole place is going to collapse." Gently yet urgently he helped Anya descend. Outside, the scene was apocalyptic in its fury. The barn was imploding upon itself, scattering the cattle like chaff in a whirlwind. Some vanished instantly into the opaque white void. Desperation etched itself into Rance's features. He understood the implications. Everything he had sweated for, the legacy his father had passed down, was being devoured by the storm. His gaze flickered to Anya, then to the tiny face nestled within her shawl. Then back to his herd, a darkened mass struggling against the implacable elements. Anya, he began, his voice tight with anguish, I have to try and save them. Disbelief widened her eyes. Rance, no. It's a whiteout. You'll never find your way back. They'll perish, he stated, his voice devoid of inflection, flat. All of them. Years of careful breeding. It's everything. He raked a hand through his already disheveled hair. I can't simply stand by and watch them die. Anya tightened her hold on the baby. What about us? What about your son and me? Her words landed like a physical blow. His son. He glanced again at the child, at the vulnerable life he had helped bring into being. He extended a hand, his gloved fingers hovering above the baby's head. He hesitated, then withdrew it. I'll be back, he promised, his voice barely audible above the wind scream. I swear it. Get to the house. Build a fire. Stay safe. Rance, she shrieked, but he was already plunging into the swirling snow, disappearing into the chaos of panicked cattle. He moved with unwavering resolve, a lone figure painted against the blank canvas of the blizzard, his form receding until he was no more than a shadow swallowed by the storm. Anya remained rooted to the spot, amidst the wreckage of their sanctuary, the wind clawing at her garments. She watched him vanish, a frozen ache in her chest. She could not know if she would ever see him again. But she knew she had to reach the house, for the sake of the child, for her own survival. She turned, shielding the infant from the icy onslaught, and began her agonizing journey through the storm. Each footfall was a battle one, each gust a fresh assault. The house seemed impossibly distant, a faint glimmer in the swirling white inferno. She pressed onward, driven by the raw instinct to endure, whispering prayers that Rance would somehow find his way back to them. Behind her, the mournful cries of the cattle faded into the storm, a constant, painful reminder of the choice he had made. Hope's embrace. The wind was a ravenous beast clawing at the cabin, each gust a brutal assault on the fragile glass. Anya knelt by the bedside, fingers clenched so tight around the blanket's edge they ached. The blizzard was a roiling white chaos that had devoured redemption. Yet, the tempest within mirrored its fury. Rance had vanished into that white hell hours earlier, driven by the imperative to shield their livelihood. Those hours crawled, each screech of the wind twisting the knot of dread in her stomach tighter. She'd sought refuge in mundane chores, mending, scrubbing, anything to still her frantic thoughts. But the cabin's silence, usually a solace, now amplified the storm's rage and her own powerlessness. Please, she breathed, the word swallowed by the gale. It wasn't just supplication for a neighbor's well-being, but a raw, primal cry for Rance. Her eyes closed, conjuring his image, the sun-etched lines around his eyes, the stubborn angle of his jaw, the surprising gentleness when he'd entrusted her with the mare's reins. A man of few words, his kindness spoke volumes. And lately, that kindness had resonated deep within her soul. Out on the plains, Rance hunched low over Buck, his skin sandpapered by the icy blast. Visibility was reduced to mere feet. The cattle, lumbering phantoms in the snow, were seized by panic. A few were already lost, victims of the sudden onslaught. Move it, you stubborn hides, he bellowed, his voice shredded by the wind. His whip cracked, a sharp counterpoint to the storm's symphony. He had to guide them to the sheltered ravine, their only refuge. Every muscle screamed in protest against the brutal elements. He tasted copper, a forgotten gash blooming on his lip. He couldn't falter, not while even a glimmer of hope remained to save the herd. Back in the cabin, Anya stood at the window, gazing into a swirling void. The ice-glazed glass blurred the already indistinct landscape. Her thoughts drifted back to her life before redemption, the perpetually overcast skies of St. Petersburg, the suffocating expectations, the looming arranged marriage, a gilded cage. She'd risked everything for freedom, for a place where she could forge her own destiny. And now, within these rough-hewn walls, she realized she'd found more than liberty. She'd found hope, embodied in the stoic strength of the man wrestling with the storm, a man who had offered her uncomplicated kindness, respect, and something deeper. Something that stirred her pulse and warmed her cheeks. Something akin to love. The revelation hit her with the force of the gale outside. Love for Rance Callahan. A terrifying, exhilarating precipice. A gamble, perhaps, but one she was now willing to take. If he returned, Rance battled through the accumulating drifts, pushing Buck and the remaining cattle onward. The ravine was close, he could sense it. Just a little further. He glimpsed the dark shapes of the rock walls through the swirling white. He urged Buck onward, his voice ragged. He had to get them there. For himself. For the animals. And he conceded for Anya. The thought of her waiting, a beacon in the storm, fueled him, lending him strength. He pictured her worried eyes. He had to make his way back to her. Anya lit a candle, its flame a small, defiant spark against the encroaching darkness within the cabin. She set it on the windowsill, a silent vigil, a promise of warmth and haven. She uttered another prayer, this time imbued with unwavering belief. More than a plea for his safety, it was a prayer for their shared future. A future she now desperately craved. The thaw. The door slammed open, a gust of icy wind whipping snow into the small cabin. Anya gasped, shielding Alara from the sudden onslaught. Rance stood framed in the doorway, a towering silhouette against the swirling white. He was covered head to toe in snow, his face gaunt and etched with exhaustion. He lurched forward, taking a step, then another, before his knees buckled and he collapsed heavily onto the floor near the fireplace. "Rance!" Anya cried, rushing to his side. Alara, startled by the commotion, began to wail. Anya scooped her up, holding her close as she knelt beside Rance, her heart hammering against her ribs. He was breathing raggedly, his chest rising and falling with visible effort. Mud and snow clung to his thick coat, and his usually vibrant blue eyes were dull with fatigue. Anya quickly felt for injuries, her hands trembling slightly. She found no blood, just the bone-deep cold that had seeped into him. "Rance, can you hear me?" she asked, brushing the snow from his face. He groaned softly, his eyes fluttering open. He focused on her face, a faint smile touching his lips. "Anya, the herd," he mumbled, his voice hoarse. "They're safe, in the south pasture, don't talk," Anya soothed, her voice thick with concern. "Just rest. I'll take care of everything." She laid Alara gently in her cradle, covering her snugly with a blanket. Then she struggled to remove Rance's heavy coat, her small hands fumbling with the frozen clasps. The wool was stiff with ice, and it took all her strength to pull it off him. Underneath, his shirt was damp with sweat clinging to his skin. She worked quickly, stripping off his boots and socks, chafing his frigid feet between her hands. Then she grabbed a thick blanket from the bed and wrapped it around him, tucking it in tightly. She stoked the fire, feeding it more wood until flames roared, casting dancing shadows on the cabin walls. Anya heated water in a small pot and soaked a cloth, gently wiping the dirt and grime from Rance's face. His skin was pale and clammy, but she could feel a faint warmth returning to him. She continued to tend to him, her touch gentle but firm, her love evident in every movement. She brewed a strong tea with honey and ginger, coaxing him to drink small sips. Hours passed. Rance slept fitfully, muttering in his sleep. Anya stayed by his side, watching him, listening to his labored breathing. Alara, thankfully, slept soundly through it all. As the first faint light of dawn began to filter through the small window, Rance finally stirred, his eyes focusing on Anya. How long was I out?" he rasped. "Almost a full day," Anya replied softly, relief flooding through her. "You're lucky to be alive." He looked around the cabin, his gaze settling on Alara's cradle. "The little one, she's all right?" "She's fine," Anya assured him. "You saved them all, Rance. You saved us all." He managed a weak smile. With a groan, he pushed himself up, sitting on the edge of the floor. Anya tried to stop him, but he waved her away. He stood, albeit shakily, and walked towards the cradle. He knelt beside it, gazing at his sleeping daughter, his face softening with love. Then something extraordinary happened. As Rance knelt there, the fire crackling merrily beside him, a change began to sweep across the land. The wind, which had howled relentlessly for days, began to die down. The heavy, oppressive clouds that had blanketed the sky started to break apart, revealing patches of a pale, watery blue. Anya watched in disbelief as the snow, which had piled high against the windows, began to melt. First a trickle, then a steady stream, running down the glass. She could hear the drip, drip, drip of melting snow from the eaves of the cabin. Rance looked up, sensing the change. He pushed himself to his feet, walked to the window, and stared out at the transformed landscape. The snow was still deep, but it was visibly receding, revealing patches of brown earth underneath. A beam of sunlight, the first in days, pierced through the clouds, illuminating the cabin in a warm, golden glow. It shone directly on Rance, bathing him in light. He turned back to Anya, his eyes filled with wonder. It's thawing," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Anya rushed to his side, taking his hand in hers. She squeezed it tightly, feeling the warmth returning to his skin. They stood together, gazing out at the melting snow, at the promise of a new season, a new beginning. The air, crisp and clean, carried the scent of damp earth and pine needles. The storm had passed, and the thaw had begun, not just in the land, but in their hearts as well.